I'm here today with the amazing Donna Peters-Lamb. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Donna. You've been on here before. This is a follow-up from our wonderful beach walks that we've been doing with parents and carers. And over the last couple of months, we've been, oh, there goes my phone, make sure it's muted. Sorry about that. We've been doing these beach walks in Brighton and Hove for parents and carers and bringing along an expert each week. And we've been in all sorts of weathers, and it's just been amazing. And so what we wanted to do is follow that up with a couple of Facebook Lives and bring in experts. And here we have Donna. So Donna, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I have a very long background in mental health. So I worked out the other day, it's probably 27 years, which is amazing in one hand and hideous on the other, because it reminds me how old I am. So I've worked in various areas. I worked in community mental health teams, or mental health projects, I should say. I've worked in psychiatric units. I've worked in schools. I worked in a local school for 11 years as part of a safeguarding team. I work in hospital at the moment. I work as part of an oncology team offering psychotherapy to people who are experiencing a diagnosis and treatment. And then I'm also in private practice. So I get asked by lovely Make Good Trouble and other organisations to come along and do some work for them. Yeah, that's kind of me. Brilliant,
thank you. And I wanted to also say that, you know, this Raising Teens Facebook group that we are going to be putting this video out on, or are on this video, the thing about it is we get so many comments from parents and carers who are going through different crises and different things going on in their lives to do with their teens. And so we've sort of taken a few of the questions that have come through the group, but also through the beach walks, which I think are quite prevalent. So I'm going to go straight in with the first question, which is from a parent who is a single working parent, and their 13-year-old daughter's anxiety has basically got steadily worse since lockdown, and she started to isolate herself from her friends and school, and she describes it as having a Monday morning battle every week now. And it's getting progressively worse. And, you know, we've got a joke sort of saying it's not really a joke, which is like Monday-itis, you know, and it's kind of, you know, what sort of advice could you give her, Donna, to, actually, I don't know if it's it's a single working parent, sorry, my fault. What can we give that parent? What advice can we give that parent for a child that's isolating or themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that obviously there will be a lot of parents and carers who that feels incredibly familiar for. And what we've noticed since the pandemic is that maybe young people that were managing to get into school and that school felt like an okay place to be, they might have been noticing that actually it's feeling less okay, because obviously our young people had effectively almost 2 years out of formal education. So it's been quite a shock, I think, to kind of get back into that routine. The second thing I would kind of query is, you said about getting worse. So this sounds to me like this might have been an issue possibly before the pandemic, or that it was noticeable before then. And I guess what I want to say about this is that we all have our very own anxiety bar, if you like. You know, we're not all made the same. How boring the world would be if we were. But actually, what I'm hearing is that potentially this young person might have always had a bit of an issue about feeling a bit anxious. Now, if I was working with that young person, I don't do work with young people in my private practice anymore. I had to close it because it got too busy. So I just work with adults. I do support young people in other areas, in other organisations. But if I was working with that young person, I would be saying, when did this first start? When did you first start to notice that you were feeling a bit anxious? And what I would say to that parent is, did you notice a time when it became more of an issue? Because I think sometimes within our family systems, you know, the family can face a difficult life event, or there can be something that happens within that family or within the environment of that family that feels very difficult. And we think maybe because the child is quite young, that they might have just kind of coasted through it. And actually, sometimes our young people get the message from difficult life events that life feels a bit scary. And there can sometimes be a part of their brain that just never quite calms down again. So that's the first thing I would say. So maybe having an open chat with your child about, what is it? Are you aware of what it is? Let's be really specific about what's happening for you. The other thing that kind of, may kind of popped into my head is when the young person is in school, so when they do get to school, because that question seems to suggest that they do actually get them to school, is the parent getting phone calls? Is the parent being told that the young person can't go into lesson? Whereabouts are we talking about, where this issue, what's exactly happening with this issue? Because if the young person is terribly anxious before going to school, but then when in school that anxiety tends to lessen and they are able actually to attend their classes, to be around their friends, to be out and about at lunch, to be out at break times, let's be really specific about what's happening, because for me it's always about, when is this happening less? When are you less anxious? And of course our instinct is to go to looking at the big problem, but actually sometimes we can find the solution to something when we look at when it's happening less, because that lets us know, well, what are the protective factors then? Is it when you're around your friends that you're feeling more relaxed at school? Although I'm hearing from that question that actually the young person is also isolating from friendship groups. So those are the two things that kind of first of all spring to mind. So has there been a big life event at some point in the past that maybe the young person hasn't talked about, hasn't thought about, hasn't wanted to kind of maybe discuss with the parent? I'm hearing that it's a single parent. So maybe, having worked in a school in the teams that I worked in, it was so very common, Daisy, that young people would say, please don't phone my mum, please don't phone my
That was
dad.
going to be my question.
I really don't want to worry them. Yeah, well, I think it's always important, if the young person is really struggling over the weekend as well, if there's that sense of, I just can't be in school, it can be really useful just to contact the school, whichever kind of contact you have in the school, to say, do you know what, my child is really panicky about school, and I'm wondering what you're seeing. Because sometimes, if it's like a head of year, or if they have a particular system, like I know some of the schools in Brighton do, where they have school bases or houses, or if you have somebody that you're able to contact, what they can often do is send around an email, a really, discreet email just to members of staff, teaching staff for that young person, and say, mum, dad, carer has contacted and is a bit worried that they're quite anxious. What are you seeing in class? Because is it about friendship? Because friendship groups can be so tumultuous at that age. At 13, it's all over the place. So is it friendship groups? Is this person isolated on their own at break time and lunchtime? Is it learning? Are they anxious? Do you perceive them to be anxious in classrooms? Is it something else? Is it something that you're seeing? Do you think that young person is being picked on, is being bullied? What are you seeing? So it just gives a bit of a heads up, because often as parents and carers, I think we can feel quite blind to the sense of what actually happens in school. We just have our child's account, and our brains will do the worst case scenario.
I think that also, being a parent myself, is one of the issues is how anxious that makes you. Absolutely. Worrying about your child makes you super anxious, and it's also that thing of how you manage your own anxiety about that, because you can worry yourself crazy about things and actually maybe it isn't what you were worried about in the first place. Yeah. But also that thing of when you talk to your child. So for me, it's when if we drive anywhere, if I give her a lift, then I've got and I can, and she doesn't mind that because we sit in parallel, but not everybody drives, and it's kind of that thing of finding the right time to even bring it up. Which it can be difficult. But would you ever recommend suggesting to the child to keep a journal of some kind, so you could sort of spot the patterns, or is that not a good idea?
You can do. And some teenagers and adults find journaling incredibly useful. What I would say with young people, and I noticed this about my own young people, is that because of the way the teenage brain is kind of wired at this point, you know, how the changes it's going through, when our young person talks to us, it can feel like everything is just the worst case scenario. Everything. Now, I know as a parent, when my young person is recounting something to me, I just, oh God, I just feel this sense of just like deepening stress and like overwork, because, you know, we're connected with our kids. That's what it's all about, being a parent and carer. It's being really connected. So having that sense of, you know, almost like the doom and gloom cloak comes over us. And then we're both sitting in doom and gloom.
Been there.
And then we both sit there thinking, yeah, life is horrific. Life is awful. How do we even do this? You know, whereas actually it's really important to remember, because of the changes that the teenage brain is going through, they very often work from their emotion center. So everything does feel very, very all or nothing. And it doesn't mean that that isn't how they feel. It doesn't mean that that isn't true for them. But it's important for us to recognize as adults with a differently hardwired brain, you know, with a brain that's no longer under construction, that actually we need to be not the, oh, come on now, or the, it isn't that bad, none of that. Listening really carefully, and this just acknowledging that feels really tough right now. What can I do to help? What do you need from me?
Yeah.
What feels different? Because when we absorb that doom and gloom, my goodness me, it can make us feel absolutely frozen too.
I love that teenage brain is under construction. That's great terminology. Everybody should know that. And
it absolutely is under construction.
Yeah,
it absolutely is under construction. So I think for the, you know, specifics for this young person and for this parent, what I would be suggesting is if Mondayitis is really kicking in, then I would suggest that on a Friday afternoon, whenever that parent gets in from work, I'm hearing that they're a working parent. So whenever they're able to kind of get back in the house on a Friday, that the Friday bag gets dumped, you know, things get taken out that are no longer needed. The Monday bag gets packed, that gets put back in. So then the bag is done. That's one less thing to think about. You have a plan, you talk through a plan on that Friday evening. Do you have homework? Let's just double check. So you don't get any shocks at 9:30 on Sunday night when your teenager comes flying down the stairs. I've got this homework to do for tomorrow. You know, so there's a bit of preparation, because if we're prepared, then we're less likely to be anxious. The other thing I would say is, if your child is isolating from friendships, then see if you can, you know, maybe it's another parent that you're friends with that has a child the same age that you've maybe gone through primary and are at secondary school with. Invite them round, go to the cinema. If your child is finding it difficult to be around and talk with other people, if they're feeling really that isolated, then finding an activity that they can do together, having that connection, because if you're feeling isolated, obviously the thing that really breaks that is connection. The other thing I would say really quickly, I know we've got other questions to get through, is to actually teach your child breathing techniques, because if their anxiety bar is really raised, then let's actually teach them something that will enable them to feel calmer. So we understand when teenagers are working from that emotion brain, adults too, we often work from our emotion brain, that's kind of how our brains work, that when we use a particular breathing technique, it can actually really calm down, it can actually switch off that stress response and actually turn on the relaxation response. So one of those breathing techniques is the 3-4-5. So really common, you've probably heard of it, but you breathe in for a count of 3, you hold your breath for a count of 4, and then you breathe out for a count of 5. So in for 3, hold for 4, out for 5. Now what that does, and you can let your child know that, is that actually nobody can see you doing that. You can be doing that on the school bus, you can be doing that in tutor time, you can be doing that at break time. Nobody can see you doing that. But actually what it does is it takes us a little bit out of our emotion brain and just kind of sits down the security guard that can be kicking off about, anxiety, because that's what it's really about. When that anxiety is really flying, it's your brain is looking at the environment and thinking you're under threat. So it's wanting to keep you safe. So all the adrenaline's going, all of that stuff's happening in the system, which feels hideous if you don't know why it's happening. So calming it down. Another breathing technique does exactly the same thing, but doesn't have the hold breath in the middle as the 7-11. So you can breathe in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11. Those are absolutely not seconds, unless you have the lungs of an Olympic swimmer. Or you can do 5 and 9. The numbers don't matter, but the longer out breath has to be longer, okay? Because that's the bit that switches it off. So you've got the 3, 4, 5 or the 7-11. The other thing, telling your child some grounding techniques. So if being in school is feeling nervous and anxiety provoking, giving your child some grounding techniques. Okay, so when you're in that class and you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, you're going to be doing the breathing. You're going to be feeling your feet flat on the floor. You're going to be imagining that you've got roots coming out of your feet, really keeping you safe, because all of the energy is often up here. And we're breathing very fast and we're feeling all of that adrenaline. So we're just going to bring it all the way down. What we're also going to do is notice the room that we're in, notice the corridor that we're in, notice the place that we're at break time. How many different colours can I see? Count them as you breathe. How many different colours? Who's wearing trainers? How many people are wearing trainers? How many people are wearing shoes? How many people haven't got school shoes on? How many people might be getting a note because they've got different coloured shoes on? That sort of stuff. So what it does is it actually just takes the attention.
Distraction.
Absolutely. Takes the attention outside. And the other thing, really quickly, before I guess we need to move on, is sleep. We know that sleep is hugely important for safeguarding against anxiety. So just making sure that your young person is getting a good amount of sleep. We know between 8 and 10. 8 and 10 hours is kind of the magic numbers. So really making sure that your young person has a good routine before bed. Because very often, as we know, when we've raised our children, and you as a parent or a carer, you might have maybe not been around this child when they were very young, so maybe you haven't done that part. But actually, it takes many ways to make a family. But actually knowing that routine that we use when our children are very, very young is still super important now. It just looks slightly different. Because when our babies and our toddlers and our children were much younger, what we wouldn't have done is fed them their dinner, waved them up the stairs, night, off you go to bed. We would have, had a routine. We might have had a bath in there, calm down. We might have had a drink that they took to bed. We might have read them a story if we were able to do that with our work routines. But we might have had something that really calmed things down. So just making sure that there is downtime happening for that young person. There are also some fantastic sleep apps on the phone, like free podcasts you can get that actually read a bedtime story. So if you are a working parent and you really just need some downtime, and obviously a 13-year-old is probably too young to be reading a story to anyway, but anything that can just enable part of that routine to be switching off, because if you're very anxious, you often have a very busy brain at night. So actually just having something else to listen to, which just enables that calm down. So really communicate what is making it less. Does the young person know when it really first started? What is it about school, particularly, that's the issue? Communicate with school, email them, speak to them, ask them just to check it out for you discreetly and carefully, just so that your young person is on their radar. Think about that Friday night routine, unpacking the bag from Friday, packing it for Monday, planning some time when homework's going to happen, just so it's out there and it's sorted. Thinking about inviting friends or being around friends, encouraging your young person to do that, maybe even thinking about clubs that they can join. Connect. It really stops the isolation. Thinking about sleep routines, thinking about those grounding techniques they can use in school, and thinking about breathing techniques which massively lower the hyperarousal or the high anxiety And us as adults, you know, parents and carers, we can do those things too.
I was about to say that, I could do all those.
Hugely important. You can maybe have a time when you work it in. I say to people, have a trigger point. Whenever I put the kettle on, I'll be like, oh, okay, where's my breathing at? Because if it's a busy day, it starts to get a bit hyped. So for me, when I put the kettle on, I do a few rounds of calming breathing, just because it enables that drop again.
Brilliant, thank you, Donna. That's amazing advice. I'm just drinking it in myself. I'm sure everybody watching this will feel the same way. Second question is around, I would say, siblings and their relationship with one another, and then the relationship with the parent and carer, because this person has a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, and their question, they both stop listening to me, is what they've said. I can tell them all the time and time again to put their washing away or bring down the vast collection of mugs or cereal bowls from the room, but nothing happens. They just brush me off. Is it something I'm doing wrong? Should I be firmer with them? My 12-year-old is definitely following her sister's lead. And when they aren't listening to me, they're having a punch up. You know, we get this all the time where, and, you know, I've got two that were quite near to one another in age, and you'd have them falling out and then them ganging up on me. Similar sort of scenario, but I guess this one's really about effective communication, isn't it? And not feeling as a parent or carer, you know, isolated yourself from the situation in terms of not being able to control it, because I think there's a power dynamic going on there clearly. What's your thoughts on that one, Donna?
I think about my own experience with my own children, and just how many science experiments I would find in their bedrooms.
Oh my word!
Gracious me, growing their own penicillin. Foresight, clearly, but it, you know, it used to drive me, and it still does drive me, because I still have a 14-year-old in my house. And I think that one of the things I found most difficult as a parent is you didn't used to be like this. It's like, is there like a switch that goes off in the teenage brain that suddenly doesn't care about stuff like that? And of course, what we do understand about that is that they just tend to not notice. They have
Tell me about it. I mean,
yeah, way much more
perishable goods on the floor. This weekend, I found mayonnaise. There was even cat food in her room, and just every single type of science experiment. And I just thought, we're going to get rats. You know, it's just fun. But I've given up moaning, because it's driven me crazy. You know, I don't want to be able to keep saying that. And my daughter's 18, so yeah, I'm not sure about that. It's
a challenge. I think there's some really important keys here. The first is about effective communication. It is. It's also about boundaries. It's also about what is the expectation. So when I say what are the expectations, what I mean is, what are your expectations as a parent and carer? But what are their expectations? We often don't think about what our teens' expectations are of us. And if they've kind of developed this understanding that it's all just going to be done by mum or done by dad or done by, you know, stepmom, stepdad, whoever it is.
Until there's no crockery left and no towels, then
there's nothing left. So, you know, there are a number of ways to think about it. So first of all, do they know how much it bothers you? Now, I don't mean how many times have you said to your young person, no, I can't believe, rah, 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 rah. I don't mean that. What I mean is, have you actually sat down with them and said, I've really had enough of this? I remember saying to my much older teenager, when I think about it now, I think, oh, for goodness sake, Donna. But at the time, it was something that was honestly driving me to distraction. And it was just about cleanliness in the kitchen and just not tidying up after making food. And I think there was one particular day, and I felt like I'd had this conversation 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I say conversation. What I mean is tidy it up, tidy it up. Why haven't you done it? Tidy it up. Whereas this particular point, I just went, do you know what? I've asked you that many times to do that, and you're still not doing it. And I have to let you know, I find that really difficult because I find it actually really hurtful.
Oh, well, you're describing my exact situation.
Yeah.
Not that I want to take
this
because this is a similar thing.
I find it really hurtful because when you don't do something that I've asked you to do however many times, I feel that you don't care about me.
I think also is that because I'm, working mum.
Yeah.
I think that I want, well, very recently I spent 7 hours clearing up the house. I just had enough on a Sunday. Go to work on the Monday, come back, and it is squalor again. And that's when it really gets you, because you just think I've spent it, just to be able to go to work and come back in and get it into the state, walk back into the room in the state that you left it would be nice. But no,
So that kind of conversation that I had with my older teenager at that point, I mean, I was almost close to tears at that point. I was just like, because this young person was also my stepchild. So there was that, even though I'd been in their life since they were 5, and they lived with us 50% of the time. So for all intents and purposes, to me, they're my child. So there was no, but I think there was a little voice in my head going, oh, that's because they don't care. And so I said this to them, and they were like, it's just crumbs. It's just toast, right? And they weren't being mean, they weren't being rude, they were genuinely gobsmacked that I was upset. But then, they made an effort and they started to change and they started to do things differently. But then it would slip back, because I know that in that teenage brain, when they've got so much else going on, it is just not a priority. So what I would say is expectation, the what. What are the expectations? Really, really clear. So they have their expectation of you, you have their expectation of them. And that for this situation, that it's very clear. Is it 12 and, do you say 12?
12 and 15-year-olds. And I'm wondering whether is this kind of exercise should be done separately with each one, but saying the same thing, so that there isn't that kind of 3 dynamic where there's going to be.
You can. I mean, it doesn't say whether does it say whether this person is a single parent?
Doesn't say.
No. So if this person isn't a single parent, then I would get the other parent on board. But remember, this is not about you do this, you do that, you do the other. It's about what I expect as your parent living in this house with you is this. What do you expect? So really clear, be specific. So when you say to a teenager, I want you to tidy up your bedroom, that's just not specific enough. Because for a teenager, tidy might mean a whole world of difference to what your expectation of tidy is. So being really specific. When I say tidy, I mean the dirty washing is in the washing basket, that there are no plates and cups and bowls.
My daughter would find that if you said tidy your bedroom, to her that would be like saying climb Mount Everest, and it literally looks like that in there.
But that's what I was going to say, because actually when we're talking to teenagers about changing behaviour, what we can't do is load it. We can't have a manifesto that we literally go, right, get comfy, I'm starting point 1. We can't do that. Because
I know it doesn't work.
It all gets lost. It all gets lost. This week, what I'm going to ask you to do is put all of your dirty washing in the washing basket. And then when they've done that, the week after, next week, I would, you don't say next week, but when that week comes, now this week, as well as the dirty washing, I'd now like you to do the cups and bowls.
I have to tell you this, but my 18-year-old, I've obviously not doing her washing because she's 18. I haven't been doing it for a couple of years, but there was no towels, but I have my own towels like this, and then they're sacred, not allowed to touch those. And she came out the other day of the shower and she had to use a flannel because
But that's it.
Standing strong, I'm going, I'm not doing it anymore.
But that's it, because there's that phrase, isn't there? If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. Because if we don't put anything different, like so we've got expectation. This is what I would like it to be like. We've got being specific, but not loading it, not really loading it. We've got the reasoning, we've got the why. The why is because I don't want to run out of crockery. I don't want to run out of towels. I don't want you going to school in filthy school uniform because you've not put it in the washing basket. And then we've got the consequence. Now, this is what I call the choice, because it is a choice. The consequence of not doing this one thing for this week is that you will. So lose your phone, lose your pocket money, not be able to do something, you know, whatever it is. But you make it really clear to the young person, I don't really want that to happen, but I understand that if you don't do that one thing I've asked you to do for this period of time, so specific, that unfortunately that's the choice. It's not a punishment, it's a choice.
I'm going to try it out.
Yeah, because it's you know, we can only do what we can do. The difficulty when we try and do stuff like this is that we often get so angry or so frustrated or so upset that we become super emotional.
Oh yeah.
And then you just got two really super emotional people trying to talk about something relatively mundane.
I mean, with this question, we've definitely got a power dynamic going on with the 12-year-old is definitely following the 15-year-old's lead. And when they're not listening to me, they're having a punch up. I mean, the one thing I was thinking about there is that whole power, well, power dynamic's the wrong word, but the dynamic between there seems to be the three of them. But because my eldest daughter's now left home, but when she lived at home, when me and my younger one would have an argument, she would barricade herself into the bedroom. So she was doing the opposite of this, but it's the same, you know. Do you kind of have do you have a meeting with the three of you or four, you know, do you actually say this is how we all feel? Is that a good idea?
You can do, but obviously when you've got three people trying to have a meeting and two of those are teenagers and one is a stressed adult.
Don't do that then. Run for the hills.
You can, you know, it's because it's about how we communicate with each other. These are life skills. Let's face it, they're life skills. I
sometimes write my daughter a little letter and I'll put it under the door. Yeah, very kind words, but just to sort of say.
And texting too. You know, texting is really good because it does take the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
And of course, with a text, you can write it 4, 5, 6 times before you choose to send it. Because often that first text we might want to send off may not be the best one. But anything that takes the emotion out of it, because there's a really, I'm very conscious of time, but there's a really useful thing to think about. So if we go back to me and the crumbs on the counter and me and my oldest, the story I was telling myself about those crumbs on the counter was that it meant that my child wasn't that bothered about what I said.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was
no respect for the other person living there. That's
the story I was telling myself. Does not mean it was true. So often when we get super emotional as parents and carers, it's because we're telling ourselves the narrative that we've put in between events is often quite an upsetting and hurtful one. My child doesn't care. My child has no respect. My child this, my child that. Whereas actually, if we can just see it as dirty clothes, bowls, a problem that just needs to be looked at differently. We can take the emotion out of it. When we can take the emotion, you know, and we can never take the emotion out of it. We're parents and carers. It's the most emotional job we have. But when we can take some of the emotion, some of the heat out of it, it takes some of the sting away. So then we're much more able to look at it as something that needs a solution.
Amazing. I'm going to finish up with this last one because it's really important, and then I'll let you talk some. I've realised I'm interjecting probably a bit too much, but this one says, my daughter was so stressed over her GCSEs and now they're finished, she's already worried about the exam results, and I feel like she needs to relax and give herself a break, but she's so tough on herself.
Yeah. I do wonder how many parents and carers of year 11 students are now kind of seeing this decompressed Well, there's a couple of things that spring to mind there, one of which is perfectionism. Perfectionism is something that can really, really be unhelpful. So that idea that it has to be perfect, it has to be absolutely the way I want it to be, because of course, as we know in life, nothing is really perfect. So when we hold ourselves up to this perfectionism, we can always expect that something will be perfect. And if it's not perfect, then how do we calm ourselves with that? The second thing is about resilience, because often when we have a challenging time, which is what GCSEs are, hugely, hugely challenging, it's about how do we develop our resilience around that? How do we look after ourselves around that? So there's a number of things I would suggest here. So if your daughter is still really, really worried about those results and it's really leaking in, or I mean, it's only been, I mean, some people haven't actually, have they finished? Some people actually haven't finished their GCSEs yet. I think there's a couple more GCSEs this week. But if your child has finished their GCSEs and you're noticing that they're super duper stressed still, I mean, that may abate over the next few days. If it doesn't, then suggest a worry time. Now that sounds bonkers, but actually when we've got kind of really overwhelming worry about a particular thing, it can be useful to give ourselves a worry time, like fence off some time. So do you know what? I know that's still really in your mind, but let's just do it from 10 until 10:15. You and I can sit together and you can tell me all the worries you have about it, or you can write it down, or you can put it in a box, you can put it in a journal that you put on the shelf. So it's actually condensed. So if any of those worries pop into the head later on in the day, it's like, no, I've got to save that till tomorrow. It'll come back. I'll use it tomorrow. I've done my worry time for today. I'll use it tomorrow. The other thing is there's a guy called Martin Seligman, who is an American psychologist, and he developed something called the 3 Ps. And he understood that for us to be resilient, we need to really think about our thinking. Because of course, when we're really worried about something, when we're really stressed about something, we have to be very, very, very aware of where our thinking is taking us. Because a thought is just a thought, is just a thought. It doesn't make it true. So even if your child is thinking, I failed all my GCSEs, well, you don't know that. There's no point in saying, no, you haven't, I'm sure you've done brilliantly, because you don't know that either as a parent. But what you can say is, you don't know that. You're telling yourself something that is blatantly unknown. You are fortune telling. So something that Martin Seligman talks about with these 3 Ps is this flexible thinking. So very often when we're very stressed about something, it's because we've made it personal. We've made it pervasive and we've made it permanent.
Wow,
so
that's interesting.
I'm a failure. I'm always going to be a failure. I'm a failure in everything. You see, personal, permanent, and pervasive. So when we can actually challenge that thinking, and when we can think about something being temporary, even if I haven't done as well as I'd like in my GCSEs, that doesn't mean it will always be the case. Even if my GCSEs aren't what I would like them to be, that doesn't affect every single area of my life. And what's the other one? Personal, pervasive.
Permanent.
So it's temporary, impersonal, and specific. So yeah, it's like I'm not a failure. I may not have done the best I would like in my GCSEs, but I can always try again. So it's about really challenging how locked into thinking we can become when we're very worried and anxious. So really challenging the personal, pervasive, and permanent, because it's just not true. It's just not true.
Again, I think that's advice that parents can use for themselves. I certainly could use that.
We tell ourselves some hideous lies. We tell ourselves some absolute shockers when we're worried and anxious, and there's really good reason for that. It's all about it's all about the brain. It's all about how the brain is working, and if it's thinking it's under threat, it has to lock down thinking to a very narrowed avenue, if you like. But to actually move out of that, to actually go, hang on a minute, how true is this? So you'll notice I didn't say I've done brilliantly on my GCSEs, because we don't know that either. So there's no point jumping from one fib to another, because we just don't know that either. Even if. What's the worst case?
Amazing. I'm going to get after this. I'm going to write all that down and use it for myself.
There's a really brilliant book. I don't know if it's still in print, but I'm sure you can, if you look it up on the internet, you might be able to, I don't know, see chapters of it or see who's selling it. But he wrote a really good book called Learned Optimism: How to Change Your Mind in Your Life. And it's all about understanding that actually sometimes when we get locked into particular ways of thinking, of course, it massively affects our mood. And so some kind of tricks and ideas of how to really open up that thinking so that it doesn't feel so pervasive and so permanent and so personal.
I mean, I certainly think given COVID and all the other sort of threats that we feel that we're under as a society, that's important to have some, have some things that are learned optimism. I like that terminology as well.
It is learned optimism.
We all need a bit of that, I think, especially right now.
Yeah. But it's not positivism, which is really different, because positivism can be quite toxic too.
Well, it can be quite unhealthy. That could be delusional, couldn't it?
Yeah, it can be unhealthy.
On any kind of reality.
Yeah, by opening up our thinking, we can just feel a bit more optimistic and just open to the possibility that things will change. Because as we know, life is an ever-changing, movable feast, and we never quite know. But it's actually, the resilience is actually how we manage whatever comes to us. And if you can hear that, that's the scratching on the door of my cats.
It's time for a cat cuddle for you, Donna.
Perfect timing.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. There's so much in there, and that's such rich advice. And I'm sure that we'll put all sorts of links on the Facebook group to support some of the things you've said. And this will be available for other people to watch if they didn't get it live. So that's great. But thank you for your time. As always, it's everything all the advice you give is so useful. So I've learned a lot already. You're really welcome. Brilliant.
Yeah, and just as parents and carers, the only thing I would say is, just be kind to yourselves. It's the hardest job in the world.
And thank you so much for coming on our beach walks as well. That was brilliant.
Oh, no worries. I loved it.
Got a bit of exercise, didn't we? So it was good. Brilliant. Thank you, Donna. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.